Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and here we have a pair of Vektor H5 pump-action rifles. This is basically the South African R4 or R5 Galil copy, but made as a civilian pump-action rifle. Now, this was originally the idea of a guy named Vektor. He worked in the Vektor tool room and came up with this idea because at the time, and we're talking early 1990s, it was pretty difficult to get a license for a semi-automatic rifle in South Africa. It was possible, but typically you'd have to be able to express a particularly good reason to have one. And so well, there were certainly people who wanted to be able to get manually operated rifles to shoot like this. And there was also a motive for companies like Vektor and Littleton Engineering, who were making guns, to be able to have something that they could sell onto the civilian market. So Cronje submitted this to the management at Littleton Engineering Works, which was one of the country's primary actual retailers of firearms. Still government operated, but kind of a mixed conglomerate. Anyway, they thought it was also a good idea, and in May of 1992, they introduced this configuration as the Hunter 5, or as it's marked on the receiver, the H5. And the idea was to have as much parts commonality as possible with the standard South African military rifles, but make them manually operated so that they could be pretty easily owned by just about anybody. So we're actually going to compare this to an R5 and show you exactly what they did to make the conversion. There are basically two patterns of H5s with three different barrel lengths that were offered. So initially, they introduced the standard H5, and this was aimed primarily at the civilian market. So they put a thumbhole wooden stock on it, a nice walnut pump handle, just to make it a little differentiated from the military rifles that it was actually based on. And then they actually had a lot of interest from the security community as well, private security companies. And so for those guys, they introduced a second model that has a black plastic forend and has a folding stock off of an R4 or R5 rifle, along with the standard pistol grip. So both of these were available at the same time. Other than the configuration of the stock and the pump, they're identical. There were three different barrel lengths offered. This one has about a 22-inch barrel, which is the long option. And then the security company version, the tactical version, was offered with the same barrel lengths as the R4 and the R5. So that's 18 inches, which we have here. And then they also had a 13-inch model, which ended basically right in front of the sling swivel. The guns never came with any iron sights, or for that matter, muzzle devices, no threaded muzzles, no flash hiders, or anything like that. They were offered initially with Trijicon, 4 to 32 scopes, and then later with a little bit cheaper option, a Tasco 4 to 32. And the top cover on the guns has a pair of mounting points on it. On this particular rifle, someone has put in some spacers and mounted the scope. The way they actually came from the factory was with a piece of Picatinny rail mounted on those two anchoring points. Operation is really quite simple. You pull back on the pump handle, and it's going to open the bolt. It has a big spring in it, so you can just let go of the pump handle and it will snap shut, chamber the round, and is ready to fire. Because the whole configuration of the rifle has changed, because there's no gas block, there's no rear sight block, there's no need for a recoil spring here, so you don't need the higher top cover like you would have on an AK, so just this flat top cover. Because of that, they also changed the safety. You no longer have a place to mount sort of the big pivoting safety lever that the rifle would have originally had. So they put a safety lever down here inside the trigger guard. So safe is back and fire is forward. The magazine well remains exactly the same as the military pattern. The guns were sold with 10-round short magazines. They do take all standard Galil type magazines though. So in practice over here, that means 35 and 50-round magazines as well. These aren't exactly meant to be field stripped super quickly, so disassembly is done with an Allen head screw back here. Take that out, and then we can pop off this top cover with its optic. The pump handle is connected to the bolt by means of this long rod, which has a little hole in it and sits over this screw. So with the handguard off, I can lift that up. It's going to go forward under spring pressure. The bolt can come back and lift out just like a standard AK bolt. And then taking the handguard off requires unscrewing the sling swivel. I'm going to leave this on for the moment. You can see exactly what's going on there. We've got the spring here for it, a sleeve that the pump handle rides on, and then this operating rod. The H5 bolt is entirely identical. It's a standard Galil type bolt. Bolt carrier, of course, is not. However, if we compare this to a standard, in this case an R5 bolt carrier, you can see that what they have done is actually just take the standard carrier and slice it right across there. The charging handle is gone, and this whole top assembly is gone. But the rest of it is totally standard. It looks a little bit odd at the back because you're used to seeing the enlarged piece here for the spring, but in actuality, that's exactly the same. And that was one of the goals in designing this, was to keep it as standardized as possible, so as little additional tooling cost as they could get away with. And you can see that additionally here on the receivers. This is a standard Galil type receiver. Everything's the same at the back. This block has been added, which just dovetails into this slot and is held in place by a pair of set screws. The fire control group is mostly the same. It is interesting to note that the auto trip lever right here, right there, has been left in the pump action rifle, and that's actually an important safety feature. That is what prevents you from pulling the trigger before, it prevents the hammer from falling before the bolt is fully in battery. So interestingly, the exact role of the auto trip lever in full auto is the same as its role in a pump action rifle. Because you do have your hand on the pump, it's possible to, if you try, to hold this thing slightly out of battery in a way that you couldn't really do on a semi-automatic rifle. At the front here, the barrel installation is identical. The one difference is that the slots, the grooves, right in the side here for the gas tube have not been milled in the H5. So where the standard gun has a pair of slots there, this does not. Instead, it has a slot machined across side to side that the front of the new top cover fits in. Markings are on the left side of the receiver here. It's marked H5, caliber .223, made in South Africa. If we go back a little bit, you'll see the Vektor logo. F and S are the safety selector markings. And as is typical on Vektor pattern rifles, the serial number is located on the barrel. In South Africa, the barrel is the controlled part, or was when this rifle was manufactured. There were a couple other versions that were actually made of this. They did one experimental one in 7.62x39, but that didn't really go anywhere. Not a popular cartridge in South Africa in the civilian community, really. And then they also made a couple that they turned into 9mm submachine guns with some insanely high rate of fire, like 1,600 rounds a minute. A couple of those were made as an experiment, never went into production. And then the rifle has actually kind of become obsolete and fallen out of favor in South Africa because a new law was drafted in 2000 and implemented in 2004 that really clarified exactly how one goes about licensing a semi-automatic rifle. And it wasn't really the intent of the law, but the practical effect was it actually became much easier to get semi-auto rifles. So the guys who previously might have needed this, it was marketed to farmers and to security agencies and that sort of thing, well, it became a lot easier for them to get real LM4, LM5 rifles. And so there are only a few uses of these still out there, and they're basically sporting uses where there is a competition that has a category for manually operated rifles, IPSC rifle or pin shooting, where these things, the manually operated category in those competitions is generally meant for bolt action rifles, like in the case of South Africa, 303 Lee Enfields. And you can run circles around someone with a Lee Enfield with one of these and a 35 or 50 round magazine. So that's about the only application they still have today. Kind of similar to the use of the marketing of pump-action rifles in the United States between 1994 and 2004 when we had our assault weapons ban. So, anyway, I thought it'd be pretty cool to take a look at a pair of these because it's extremely rare to find them outside of South Africa. Hopefully you agree. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.